So, Captain Wolfram's A to Z of fencing reaches R, the 3 R's, as it were, and unfortunately, as you can probably tell, the first R is for rain stops play. And I say rain stops play because all this metal stuff, you don't really want to get it wet, and especially in our game when we have, and steel has a tendency when it gets rained upon, whether it be the blades or the fence and mask, to rust, which is an R that is not one of our 3 R's, and we want to keep it that way. So what you actually want to do if you find yourself actually caught fencing in the rain, be careful as soon as you're done and as soon as you get back under cover to dry the stuff off correctly. In the case of the masks especially, you don't want to be trying to dry it with like a regular towel, especially something like artificial fibres. You want yourself nice absorbent kitchen roll and dab it, pat it on to soak up the water. Same applies to blades. And then get some rust protection on, some oil as quickly as possible in order to try and avoid that rust. The reason I say not to use a towel with artificial fibres, for example, is because, of course, the artificial fibres will tend to just push little water droplets around rather than absorbing them. So, kitchen roll. Nice absorbent kitchen roll will do the job better. The second R of the 3 is RTFM. RTFM, which, as everybody knows, means read the fencing manual. Quite a few fencing manuals knocking around. This is the one I could find for filming that my wife didn't hide while tidying yesterday. But it just is there to show as an example. When I say read the fencing manual, what we're really talking about, of course, with a lot of them, is interpret and figure out what you're going to do. I think I said in P is for plates about how some manuals there is no text surviving. Other manuals there is. In the case of Capel Ferro there is. And we have to interpret what exactly are they showing us, and then take into account the fact that sharp edges react and interact with each other differently than blunted edges do, and trying to decide, because they didn't have moving pictures, so there will be several different moves or sequences shown in a single illustration, and you have to interpret what does this mean exactly. But it's quite aside from the pandemic that you have now. It's coming into winter, the weather tends to be rubbish. So this is a good time to study these. You can get manuals in print form or in ebooks. They're available on Amazon. They're available from various historical sites, from HEMA clubs, from the Royal Armouries, various places, depending on how much you want to spend and how portable you want it to be. They don't always show exactly what we do in the SCA game. Partly because, especially if any of them are covering sort of grapples and takedowns and stuff like that, which a lot of them do, Fiore and so on, which are things that we don't do in our game. that's another sort of layer of complication when it comes to interpreting them to put into practical use for what we do, because there are these elements that you might have to leave out quite a lot. First, you have to figure out, what does this actually mean? What are they doing? And then you have to figure out, well, which bits can I use and which bits can I not, and so on and so forth. But these are very important sources. They help us become better fencers. I've seen myself, even just in the last 5 years or so of being in the SCA, that the crossover between HEMA and SCA is growing, and the ones who study the manuals are bringing so much more into it than people who don't. So studying manuals is a really good idea. It's always something new to learn. But it's not just in period manuals. Because think about it, we also have, your kingdom and regional, sometimes, and certainly kingdom and society-wide rules and handbooks and so on. Those are our fencing manuals. Those are the SCA's rule manuals, and it's always wise to be well read in those also, especially if you're in MIT or something. You need to know the rules, and never be afraid to, when you see that your regional or kingdom rules are being consulted upon for an update, never be afraid to go and comment, again, especially if you're in MIT, and never be afraid to go and comment, because they're built upon the fact that we've actually done stuff. They're built upon our experiences. Not just read the fencing manuals, but in the case of our handbooks and manuals in that sense, feel free to help improve them and to help keep them current and stuff like that. Which is also a little bit easier today if you find yourself being familiar with the handbooks and rulebooks from different areas, not necessarily different kingdoms, although that all knowledge is good, and especially if you get visitors to your kingdom from another kingdom, well, you might be able to explain better what the difference is. But especially the difference between the basic society rules and your kingdom or area's rules. If you are familiar with both, I think that adds a little something to your understanding. So that's RTFM. So our third R is the redouble, or redoublement. For some reason, sport fencing tends to use the French pronunciation. There are a few different definitions. If you go by the sport fencing definition, the British Fencing Society defines the redouble as a second attack where your first attack has been parried and you bring your point back online in a different line. More generally, sport fencing tends to describe, or define it rather, as a second attack from the lunge position. So you've made your lunge, and then you make a second attack, whether it be continuing in that same line by stretching further or taking an extra step, or whether it be, for example, you've made a cut and then follow up with a thrust. In our game, what we usually find is it's more to do with when you've made an attack, especially from a lunge, and not quite reached the target, because either you've misjudged it or your opponent has moved back a little bit, and then you find yourself sort of in whichever position, but you've given away the time. You've given away the time. You have to be really quick to continue it, or just get out, do something else, whatever. What very few of us do is actually redouble. So, for example, if I go into a nice short lunge, but I haven't quite hit the target, well, I can stretch forward, whether just by the arm or whether by taking that little extra half step. But of course, having given away the timing, this makes the redouble a little risky, because after having made the initial attack, I can then just step onto somebody else's point, which I don't really want to do. So even if we have the, say, blade engagement, maybe I'm being sneaky or clever and going this diagonal route, sort of Gigante style, keeping the enemy blade on the outside of mine, but I still don't quite hit the target, then I can still do, and should still do that second move, that redoublement, to actually reach it. And very few of us do that. It's one of the reasons why I mentioned in the video on I mentioned in the footwork video and on the lunge video that you don't want to take too long a lunge. If I take a really long lunge, aside from the potential to become unbalanced or to not be able to recover if the enemy counters, it also makes redoubling that little bit more difficult, because I can't really take a further step if I've lunged as far as I can. So this is another one of those reasons why this is, this sort of like half as far as you can go is probably about ideal, because then if you do have to redouble, you've still got room to do it, to take that extra half step. You've still got that in reserve, which is definitely an advantage. As for the British Fencing Society's definition of this, well, it's just doing something else when your point's been parried offline. Well, I think I would just call that fencing rather than specifically a redouble. That's just the action of combat. That. Yeah, first person view. So okay, let's say if I take this. Well, okay, let's say I take about that much of a step, but I don't quite reach the pearl if I do that. Then I still have room to take another half step in there I can reach. And we need to do that more often in our fencing in general. So okay, now I'm going to do the Gigante style, like, step diagonally. Oh, I don't quite reach, so I need to take that other step. And very few of us, quite surprisingly, do. For the other definition, the making a second attack just from the lunge position, of course, it doesn't necessarily need to be a thrust. So I could be making a cut, not quite there, or maybe that's been to beat the enemy sword, and then, I don't know if that's what they call a redouble in the sense of the SCA game. It is a sport fencing terminology, but for the sake of completeness and for those who maybe only join the SCA fencing and don't know about sport fencing, or for those who come from sport fencing and wonder why we might use it in a different manner, or use the word in a different manner, that would be the explanation. Now, I guess this video is just about over because we are about to go back and look back to the Rain Stops play.